Why does Violet have 2 powers? Invisibility and force fields. Mr. Incredible, Elastigirl and Dash only get 1. So why does Violet get 2? And yeah, I know, in Jack Jack Attack, Jack Jack is shown to have like 6 powers, more than the entire family put together. But that just adds to how unfair this all is. But I don't think it's just unfair, I think there's a reason behind it. And today, we're going to talk about that. Hello there! How are you doing? Well, there's actually a theory about why Jack Jack has so many powers that was posted on Reddit nearly 3 years ago. And I really like it, and I think it answers the Jack Jack question. I'm just summarising the Reddit post, so if you want to read the whole thing, there'll be a link to it in the description. And it basically says, instead of assuming that Jack Jack is some sort of overpowered omni-hero, it's more like his powers are developing because they only just manifested. Over time though, his power will focus and become a single, cohesive set of powers like the rest of his family. And I think this is a natural part of being born with superpowers in the Pixar universe. Over time though, the super's body will latch on a specific power that works well with the person's specific skill set and their personality. And I think this is a nice idea that the superpower kind of goes with the person's personality, and it fits really well with the rest of the Parr family. Bob believes he can do everything himself and never needs help. So therefore he has super strength, and literally never needs help. Elastigirl is a flexible stay-at-home mum, who believes that everything can be fixed with a certain amount of flexibility. So therefore she is literally flexible. Dash is impatient and impulsive, so therefore he has super speed. And Violet is shy and defensive, so she has invisibility and force fields. And then of course Jack Jack, who's still a baby, his personality hasn't set yet. So therefore he demonstrates lots of powers, and it will eventually latch onto one once his personality sets. And that all seems to make sense. But it still doesn't really explain why Violet has 2 powers. Everyone else settled on 1, but since Violet has 2 main personality traits, she gets 2? It still doesn't seem fair. Like, does that mean if Riley from Inside Out was a super, she'd have 5 powers because she has 5 islands of personality? Wow, that is a theory for another day. But anyway, to summarise, this theory basically states that the super's superpowers are to do with the super's personality. Which actually makes a lot of sense if you consider where their powers came from. Which, according to the Pixar Theory, humans did not develop superpowers on their own. Instead, the government gave them their powers using highly advanced machines and then trained them. So the supers would have been normal humans whose potential was unlocked by the US government. After being supercharged, the supers could then pass this trait on genetically to children, explaining why Violet, Dash and Jack Jack have powers. And I think the fact that the supers were normal humans who were then supercharged explains a lot. For example, it explains why all the supers were American, because the US government would want these supers for themselves and wouldn't want to supercharge people in other countries. It also explains why none of the villains in the film were superpowered. Like, imagine how lucky and crazy a coincidence it would be if all the superheroes in the world were good, and that the government just had the power to shut them down at will. That would be some strange coincidence if the government didn't set it up themselves. And if you want evidence that there are no supervillains, let me ask you, why would the supervillains stop acting when the superheroes were banned? That would be their chance to take over the world. It also explains why the supers were so good at working things out, and were basically like secret agents with superpowers. Like, Mr. Incredible worked out that Syndrome's password was Kronos so easily. And that's got to convince you he's been trained to some extent. And most importantly, this explains why the superpower matches the super's personality. Because the government will have supercharged them with a superpower that matches their personality. However, this also tells us that the super children, like Violet, Dash and Jack Jack, definitely weren't planned on by the government. And this is actually really important. Because as an adult, your personality is much more set in stone than when you're a child. Like, I for one have a very different personality now to what my personality was 10 years ago. And if the super's superpowers are based on their personality, does that mean your powers would change when your personality changes? And yes, I think it does. For someone like Violet, who is just starting to go through her teenage years, she'll be very hormonal, and her personality will be beginning to change, develop, and mature. And to be honest, she is the character who goes through the biggest personality change through the film. She starts as a very shy child, which explains her invisibility powers.
He looked at me.
But she's also shown to be a moody, defensive teenager.
So, how about you, Vi? How was school?
Nothing to report.
You've hardly touched your food.
I'm not hungry for meatloaf.
Which explains her force field powers. And at the end, she's shown to be rather confident, almost the opposite to her shy personality at the start.
Do you think maybe you and
Yeah?
do you know?
I like movies. I'll buy the popcorn. Okay?
Movie.
But despite this drastic change in personality, she doesn't lose her powers of invisibility, which leads me to believe that Violet, Dash, and Jack Jack could all have multiple powers by the time they become adults, as their personality and powers change and develop throughout their teenage years. But at the moment, Violet is the only example, so let's see how this theory holds up. Violet was a shy child. At times, she wanted to be invisible, and therefore she has the power of invisibility. But within the last couple months or years, her personality started to change. She's starting to become a teenager. She's starting to become interested in boys.
What are you hungry for?
Tony Ridinger.
Shut up.
Well, you are.
I said shut up, you little insect.
And despite still being a shy girl, she's now a moody, defensive teen. And within this period of time, she's also started to develop a defensive power, the power of force fields.
No!
Hey, no force field!
And there's evidence behind the fact she only started to develop the power of force fields recently. All the supers in the film are very competent with their powers and can use them to almost perfection. Mr. Incredible with his strength, Elastigirl with her elasticity, Frozone with his ice powers, Dash with his speed, and Violet with her invisibility. However, there is one character who isn't confident in using one of their powers. That being Violet with her force fields. And there's a clear example of her not being able to use this power during the plane scene in the film.
Abort, abort, abort!
She definitely isn't as confident using her force field powers as she is using her invisibility powers, at least. Which seems to imply she hasn't had the force field powers as long. I guess there is an argument that force field powers are harder to use and control than invisibility powers. But there's no evidence for or against this, and you also need to consider she literally has these invisibility powers to perfection. She can literally turn her entire body invisible for as long as she wants. But on the plane, she was hardly able to produce a force field the size of a basketball. She also says the line,
I've never done one that big in my life!
which seems to imply she can remember every time she's made a force field in her life, and that she knows she's never produced a huge one before. However, we also know that supers start showing abilities of their powers from a very young age. And how would she remember if she produced a huge force field the size of a house at the age of 1? She wouldn't, unless she can remember every time she's produced a force field, because she only started being able to produce them recently. And I think that's the concrete evidence that shows she's just started to develop these force field powers recently. We also know that powers are something that can be trained and improved upon over time. For example, Mr. Incredible says to Dash,
Barely see it on the tape.
They caught you on tape and you still got away with it? Whoa! You must have been booking. How fast do you think you were going?
which seems to imply he's never gone that faster before and is getting faster. And then there's also the training montage scene which shows Mr. Incredible improving upon his powers, meaning that Violet probably just hasn't had the time or freedom
You said we weren't supposed to use our powers!
to work on these force field powers. So yeah, in summary, the reason Violet has 2 powers is because the powers are based on the super's personality. And because she's going through a hormonal period in her life, her personality is starting to change, and with it has come new force field powers to add on to her original invisibility powers. And that also means that Violet might not be the only one with multiple powers by the time the Incredibles sequel is out. And I think there's even a possibility the sequel could be about the young supers with their powers changing and developing over time, which would be an appropriate plot to all the teenagers returning to see the sequel to their favourite childhood film. But yeah, that's everything I've got to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got anything to say yourself, leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. Click subscribe by clicking here. And if you want to see another video about Violet and how she might potentially be the mother of another character from a Pixar film, click here.